There's been this growing obsession with division in gaming. I think everybody has felt it at this point. Everything's being politicized or polarized in some way, shape, or form. We're watching companies burn billions of dollars accomplishing nothing. Meanwhile, some of the most successful games, well, they're not drawing a line in the sand. They're opening a door and welcoming people in. So what brings somebody to disregard that entirely? Oh, there's this thing that a lot of people don't really seem to like. I'm gonna do more of it. Recently, Neil Druckmann shared details about their upcoming game, Intergalactic, the Heretic Prophet. And in it, he completely disregards a lot of the negative feedback around The Last of Us Part 2, mocking it in a lot of cases, and basically saying that the next game is going to be even worse. I think that the most successful studios are the ones that are the most humble. They take in feedback, good or bad, they process it, and then they implement that into their game. While they are creatives, they understand that they are making something that people are supposed to want to buy. There are decisions that you can make, there are things that you can do, but at the end of the day, people have to buy your game. Otherwise, you go out of business. There is this misconception that artistic integrity means refusing to compromise, but the best creatives in this industry understand the difference between challenging your audience and alienating them. The more you treat your audience like an obstacle, the more likely you are to get exactly what you want and avoid them entirely. With billions of dollars lost at this point, you would think that studios might want to take a step back and reassess. There are themes, characters, messages, and art styles that simply aren't resonating with players, and forcing them harder isn't going to change that. The industry, hell, the world itself is more divided than it's ever been, and a fractured audience is bad for business. Naughty Dog's upcoming game, Intergalactic, the Heretic Prophet, or perhaps more aptly named the Self-Defeating Prophet at this point, was first introduced back at the Game Awards 2024, and I won't lie, on a visual level, it looks great. The art direction is striking, the retro futuristic aesthetic is cool, and even though I'm not really a big fan of blatant product placement, the ship, the time period, and the anime playing on the monitor all give it a really strong identity. It has a lot of things that should appeal to a pretty broad audience. Yet the game's reveal was met with resounding backlash. The trailer racked up 2.5 million views on YouTube, along with a devastating 286,000 dislikes. Across comment sections and social media, the most common criticism wasn't about the gameplay or setting, it was about the character. And I said this in my reaction to the Game Awards, but I'm gonna say it again. This is an 80s theme sci-fi action game that is set in space. Your audience is predominantly male. A masculine, rough around the edges bald woman is going to be an incredibly difficult sell, especially when players have become hyper aware to social and political messaging in video games and how often it's forced into the medium. Now, I've seen a lot of people argue, what about Sigourney Weaver in Alien? Sure, Ripley is one of the most beloved sci-fi protagonists of all time, but the key difference here is she earned that role. Alien didn't just throw you into the deep end and expect you to care. Ripley grew into the hardened, battle-scarred survivor that we all remember. Beyond that, Sigourney Weaver was already a recognized actress. Audiences were familiar with her and they wanted to see her succeed, but Intergalactic? We know nothing about this character. There's no connection, no earned trust, just an unconventional and uninteresting character with the expectation that we should care. And maybe in isolation this wouldn't be that big of an issue, but considering Naughty Dog's history, it's likely going to be something that nobody wants. They've already played this game before with The Last of Us Part 2. They pushed an overtly divisive character, dismissed player feedback, and then mocked those who pushed back. It's a pattern. And sure enough, that same air of pretentiousness is already hanging around Intergalactic. In an article written by Games Radar titled Intergalactic, the Heretic Prophet is a game about faith and religion, which Neil Druckmann jokes will surely get less hate than The Last of Us Part 2. You know what? Let's do something people won't care much about. Let's talk about faith and religion. Dustin Bailey writes, the story of The Last of Us 2 proved to be absolutely polarizing, with some players loving it, others hating it, and a subset of the latter group engaging in an ugly harassment campaign against the developers at Naughty Dog. The studio is now at work on Intergalactic, the Heretic Prophet, a sci-fi game about religion that the director, Neil Druckmann, jokes will surely get less hate than The Last of Us 2 did. Druckmann spoke about Intergalactic's fictional timeline with 28 Days Later writer and Civil War director Alex Garland as a part of Sony's Creator-to-Creator podcast series. I joke about this with the team, Druckmann said. With The Last of Us 2, we made certain creative decisions that got us a lot of hate. A lot of people loved it, but a lot of people hated that game. Who gives a shit, Garland quipped. Exactly, but the joke is like, you know what, let's do something that people won't care much about. Let's make a game about faith and religion, Druckmann concluded. While the statute of limitations for spoilers from a 2020 video game might be up, I'll refrain from speaking too directly about the creative decisions Druckmann is alluding to, since a lot of new Last of Us fans are presumably about to experience them as a part of Season 2 of the TV show. But when it comes to spoilers, Naughty Dog took some extreme measures to keep The Last of Us Part 2 from getting ruined the first time around. I've gotten in a lot of trouble, actually, because I was trying to protect the story, Druckmann told Garland. We released a trailer of The Last of Us 2 where we faked a shot, and we showed Joel somewhere where he would never make it to because of things that happened in the story as a deliberate way to throw off the scent. People that didn't like the game accused that of being false advertisement. Again, who gives a shit? Garland responded. They can't be this stupid. Who am I kidding? Of course they're this stupid. This is a Hollywood movie mentality that has no place in gaming. See, if a movie bombs, it might dent a studio's reputation, but it is nothing compared to the financial impact of a $70 game failing to resonate with its audience. Unlike films, games rely on long-term engagement, word of mouth, and player investment. Saying who gives a shit about an audience criticism while openly antagonizing that very group of people that funded your project in the first place isn't just pretentious, it's signing your own death warrant. Now you want to take it further. Double down instead of course correct and proudly announce that your next game's going to be about religion, because that's sure to go well. Nothing says like we learn from our mistakes like choosing an even more divisive topic to alienate what audience you have left. But who gives a shit, right? Let me guess, the religion in Intergalactic is built on lies? Because that's so original. I haven't seen that since, I don't know, every Final Fantasy game, Dragon Age with the Chantry, Outer Worlds with corporate theocracy, Assassin's Creed with Christianity, Far Cry 5 with cults, the Sanctus in Metaphor, and every other religious group in Starfield. Wow, groundbreaking. I'm surprised that the character isn't starting out with amnesia. Knowing Druckmann, like every other modern gaming writer, there will be zero nuance, it'll be overtly preachy, and directly on the nose. You know, the backlash for The Last of Us Part 2 wasn't just about the story decisions, it was about a fundamental shift in Naughty Dog's creative direction under Neil Druckmann's unchecked authority. The studio that had once thrived under collaboration and balance had become a one-man show. I recently went back to play The Last of Us Part 2, and man, it's just so damn good. There's just so much soul in every part of it. The world feels lived in. The level design and atmosphere make it the most human take on a zombie apocalypse that I've ever seen, but it's the characters that pull you in. The writing, the voice acting, the little moments of conversations that make them feel real, the sound, the music, the pacing. It all just grabs you in a way that few games ever do. I originally had booted it up just to grab some footage for a video, but before I knew it, I was fully immersed, playing the game way longer than I thought that I would. Now I'm finishing it again, because how could I not? It's one of those once-in-a-lifetime experiences that we chase in gaming. The kind that sticks with you. The feeling you had when you first stepped into Halo, World of Warcraft, Red Dead Redemption, Metal Gear, that pure, unforgettable joy of playing something that you know that you're going to remember forever. And that's why I don't understand, how does a studio that created something so masterful as The Last of Us Part 1, how did they end up here? How do you go from a game that resonated so deeply with players, that felt so real, to a sequel that alienated half of the audience, and now a new IP that's doubling down on your worst instincts? Then I remember that I often ask this question with a lot of other series, and I end up coming to the same answer. This isn't the same Naughty Dog. Druckmann has been there the whole time, sure, but before, he used to have people that were keeping him grounded, people that were challenging him, pushing back, and refining his ideas into something that actually worked. Bruce Straley, Amy Hennig, and countless others shaped the Naughty Dog that people fell in love with. Now those voices are gone, and what's left is a studio that no longer has restraint, the balance, or the humility to make something for the players instead of itself. While Druckmann was credited as the creative director of The Last of Us Part 1, the game's story was not his alone. Bruce Straley and other key creatives played a crucial role in shaping it, rejecting his ideas that didn't fit into the world, including Druckmann's original revenge plot, a story where Tess would hunt Joel across the country. Straley pushed back, recognizing that it was forced and out of place, leading to a far stronger narrative that defined The Last of Us 1. But Druckmann never let go of that idea. Once he had full creative control of The Last of Us 2, that scrapped revenge plot became the core of the game. Joel, the heart of The Last of Us 1, was brutally killed off in a way to force players to sympathize for his killer, Abby. Joel, the man that we watched lose his daughter, struggle with trauma, bond with Ellie, and save her, needed to become the villain so that he could promote his personal beliefs and ideologies through Abby. Druckmann even retconned elements of the first game just to justify it, but players weren't buying it, and it backfired spectacularly. Despite massive marketing and media praise, The Last of Us 2 sold a third of the copies of its predecessor, from 30 million copies sold to 10 million copies sold. Naughty Dog burned years of goodwill, not by taking risks, but by refusing to listen. And now they're doing the exact same thing again with their next game. And we keep seeing this cycle happen over and over again. Games that first and foremost should be video games are being hijacked by poor leadership and turned into battlegrounds for personal ideologies. It's not about creating great stories or memorable experiences anymore. It's about making a statement, drawing a line in the sand, and daring players to pick a side. You know, one of the things that I really like about making videos is that I get to evolve my opinion over time. I get to take in more information. I get to research. I get to read articles and watch videos and read the comments and things like that. And one thing that I've noticed is that I've seen a lot of people that have talked about how there needs to be less social politics and politics in video games. And I think that that sidesteps and misses the point entirely, because some of the most popular games, some of my most favorite games, and likely even your favorite games, have had some level of social or political content mixed into those games. But the difference is that with those games, see, we could understand the perspective of its creators because they did such a good job making the game and communicating their message or whatever it might be. The problem today is that things are so polarized. The line is being drawn so deep that we can't enjoy the game unless we perfectly align with the beliefs of its creator. The player's experience is coming at the cost of the message. That's not the way that things should be. That's not good management. That's not good creative direction. That's not a good video game. And ultimately, it's doing more harm not only to the studio, to its reputation, but also to the message that they're trying to deliver in the first place. It's an ineffectual product. And unless I'm mistaken, over the last couple of years, some of the most popular games that we have seen have been games that had nothing abrasively divisive about them. So then my question is, where is this obsession coming from? And why is it uniquely American in a lot of cases? Is it ego? Is it social media? And even more so, how are these publishers greenlighting it in the first place? This is not the stance that you should take against your audience. You should not shrug off their complaints. You should be listening to them. You should not be doubling down on your mistakes. You know, I read another article that was talking about the podcast with Druckmann, and they said, yes, we need somebody out there challenging social norms. No, you don't. You need somebody selling video games. I'm sure that's what the Naughty Dog employees are going to be chanting from the unemployment line. We were challenging social norms. No. What are you talking about? You know, the only thing that makes sense to me is that these companies were caught up in the political and social chaos of 2020. They mistook outrage for sustainable engagement, and they invested in it. And now they're so far down the rabbit hole that they can't turn back around. And now here we are watching yet another studio and another game going to its inevitable end. You know, games media has spent years shielding developers from the consequences of their own decisions, bending over backwards to explain away obvious failures while outright refusing to engage with the real reasons why games fail or succeed. The Gamer recently published an article analyzing why Monster Hunter Wilds is thriving and Dragon Age the Veilguard is floundering. And while they touch on some solid points, they conveniently ignore the elephant in the room. One game respected its audience, the other didn't. Nowhere in this article is Veilguard's infantilized, censored narrative discussed. Nowhere is there a critique about how the art style abandoned the franchise's grittier fantasy aesthetic, an aesthetic that we have seen games like Elden Ring and Baldur's Gate 3 have proven is massively successful. The article completely sidesteps how the game's modern social commentary, gender ideology, and contemporary dialogue completely clash with its medieval fantasy setting, alienating players who wanted a classic Dragon Age experience. But they do bring up something interesting, a concept, room to shrink. And I think this is really important context in regards to Intergalactic and as well as many other games that we've seen fail. Andrew King of The Gamer wrote, "The most straightforward answer is that Monster Hunter had a lot more rough edges to sand off. It's a series that is known for its complex combat, esoteric multiplayer, and interlocking systems that aren't always well tutorialized. Monster Hunter Wilds still delivered on much of what the series is known for, as someone who has played a couple dozen hours of the previous games, but never dove into one especially deep. Wilds is very recognizable as Monster Hunter. The core loop is still there, it's just contextualized a bit differently thanks to this entry's greater emphasis on story and characters. Killing monsters, harvesting their parts, turning them into gear, that's all still here, but with a better on-ramp, lower difficulty, and more narrative hooks. The game also retains much of the series' complexity. You still have a ton of weapon types that each take practice to master. There are multiple currencies that you need to collect, crafting to engage with, and thoughtful combat to learn. The Veilguard's problem is that Dragon Age was never as tough to master as Monster Hunter. Origins had a lot of role-playing depth and a detailed real-time with pause battle system, but the previous entries had already moved away from that by the time that Veilguard rolled around. Veilguard was streamlined in every way. It traded in Inquisition's open world for a level-based structure, and the levels were hyperlinear, leaving little room for exploration. The dialogue choices were superficial, allowing for little real roleplay. The combat was fun but simple, action RPG fare. The series lore was pared back or ignored, and the companions were largely uninteresting. The game began as a live service game, and it shows in the lack of detail and depth given to the world. It feels like a place you would inhabit with 100 other players, not like it was designed to react to your actions. The idea is simple here. Monster Hunter can afford to lose some of its players after launch because it has a strong, dedicated fan base. The series has always been built on a solid foundation, and it continues to expand without alienating the people that made it a success. It attracts in new players, but it doesn't sacrifice its identity to do so. Now compare that to Dragon Age the Veilguard, which did the opposite. Instead of keeping its fan base intact and growing outward, it boxed itself in, narrowing its appeal to a very specific player while disregarding the ones that kept the franchise alive for over a decade. The result? A game that didn't have any room to shrink because it had nowhere else left to go. It was a game that launched into a corner, and now it's stuck. Now, with that added context, you should see my perspective, because The Last of Us Part 2 is one of the clearest warning signs available. Just like Veilguard, it narrowed its audience, disregarded what made the original resonate with millions so that they could push an alienating, polarizing narrative, and now Naughty Dog is doubling down again with Intergalactic. Instead of course correcting, these studios are spending more money while selling to fewer people. Every new game has a bigger budget, a longer development cycle, and higher expectations, but instead of broadening their appeal, they just keep shrinking their audience to an ideological niche. The cycle is obvious by now. Shrink the audience, spend more money in development, dismiss criticism, and then blame the players when it flops. I can't believe I actually have to say this, but if you're spending more money while making a game that fewer people want and actively dividing the audience that you do have, you are going to fail. And it's not just that developers are refusing to recognize clear warning signs. It's become an industry apparatus. Instead of engaging with player criticism in good faith, they've developed an overused playbook: gaslight, deflect, and vilify. When players were pushing back against The Last of Us Part 2, they were told that their criticism wasn't valid. They were lumped in with some of the worst people online, the doxers, the threats, the actual extremists. Instead of addressing real concerns, the character assassinations, the forced narrative shifts, the retcons that broke player immersion, the conversation was hijacked by something else entirely. And we've seen the exact same pattern play out with Dragon Age the Veilguard. The second that players expressed any concern about the art direction, the infantilized writing, the forced modern social commentary, the media framed it as reactionary backlash. It was never about why players rejected the game. It was about blaming the audience for not embracing progress. Even Mark Dara, one of the key figures behind Dragon Age, went onto YouTube to make a video to lecture players about how they don't even know who to blame when a game fails. He hyperfixated on a minority of bad actors, using them as a shield to deflect legitimate criticism. Man, these developers really love the spotlight when things go well. When their games succeed, they will happily take credit. They'll do interviews, they'll take awards, they'll bask in the praise, but the second that things go sideways, suddenly blame is nebulous. Suddenly it's the audience being toxic. Suddenly it's the publisher's fault or the marketing's fault or some intangible misunderstanding rather than the obvious reality. They made a game that people didn't want, and they'll blame you when it fails. We've reached a point where this cycle of gaslighting, deflection, and alienation isn't just leading to bad games, it's actively killing studios. This industry has suffered one of the worst years for layoffs in gaming history. Thousands of developers out of work, entire studios shuttered. We're seeing massive budget cuts, project cancellations, and publishers scrambling to course correct. And yet, instead of acknowledging the real problem, spending more money while making games for fewer people, these studios and the media are doubling down on the same failing strategy. How many times now have we seen publishers gamble on a high-budget game, throwing in every divisive and alienating design choice possible, and then act confused when it fails? This is the road that Naughty Dog is walking with Intergalactic. They already saw the backlash and the sales drop-off from The Last of Us Part 2, but instead of learning from it, they're mocking the very idea of a course correction. They think they're above their audience. They think that they can push whatever message they want, spend hundreds of millions of dollars on it, and people will just accept it. But that's not how this works anymore. If Intergalactic fails, Naughty Dog is in serious trouble. Sony is not going to endlessly fund passion projects that sell half of what they used to. The Last of Us Part 1 sold 30 million copies. Part 2 sold 10 million. What happens when Intergalactic barely scrapes by at 5? They are spending more to sell less, and they're actively mocking their audience. And you can only do that for so long because you're going to run out of money, you're going to run out of goodwill, and you're going to run out of time. You know, before researching and writing for this video, I didn't realize that Naughty Dog had lost such critical talent. And that always ends up being such a root cause issue when it comes to some of these studios, because it's never just one great mind that's making something. It's a network of them. They're pushing back on one another. They're iterating. They're shutting some ideas down. They're refining the game and the content that's going to be in it to make the game that everybody actually wants to play. But looking at, you know, Neil Druckmann, apparently left to his own devices, his ego and his own motivations take precedent over what players want. You know, Amy Hennig, as an example, was behind Nathan Drake, the Uncharted series, but also she was behind Legacy of Kain. Bruce Straley seems like the guy that was really keeping Druckmann in check. He was the one that helped write the story for Last of Us Part 1, and he worked on Uncharted. Losing that kind of talent has a long-lasting effect, especially if the creative director that you're leaving behind doesn't know how to steer the ship. You know, I hate that there are bad actors out there that are threatening developers and doxing them and things like that, but at the same time, I hate it even more that they're used as a way to be able to deflect criticism, genuine criticism about a game. And it only makes things worse because the developers ignore the criticism and then they double down on things to be contrarians, to be adversarial more than anything else. And then you're just going to get even more of those people as a result of it. I'm not saying that you need to bend to their will. I'm just saying ignore them, but don't ignore the players that are genuinely criticizing the work. And, you know, I saw a lot of people that were like, oh, when they saw my reaction to Intergalactic, you know, this is political or this is ideological. It's not. Like, I don't like the game, or I don't like the way the game looks because I just don't like the way the character looks. It's literally as simple as that. It's not an attractive character. It's not a necessarily interesting character. And looking at the history of Naughty Dog and what they did with The Last of Us Part 2, which I personally hated, I don't want to have anything to do with it. I know that it's not for me, and I don't buy games that are not made for me. Well, sometimes I do by accident. You know, I've just come to the conclusion that none of this is going to stop until some of these studios just wipe themselves off the map. And that sucks because some of these studios have come up with some of the greatest games, literally some of all-time greatest games. But they don't, you know what? It's like they view their customers like friends on Facebook. How many times have you guys seen somebody post something on Facebook saying that they want to, you know, if you believe in X or Y, you can unfriend me and never talk to me again, friend or family. Like, there's no compromise. You can never find common ground. It's this way or the highway, and that's about it. And now that's bleeding into the products that we're buying. That's not good for business. It's sad. There's no way to be able to find progress there. You have to compromise in one way, shape, or form. You know, I'm not going to write off Intergalactic entirely. I always wait to at least see what it looks like when it releases at the end of the day, except for Concord and To Kill the Justice League, but you can kind of see those ones from a mile away. But yeah, I mean, looking at the way that they're already talking about it, watching that podcast, these guys just can't get over themselves. And if you're only thinking about yourself, how are you supposed to sell something to somebody else? Anyway. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you guys for watching. Share the video to your friends, comment down below, like the video, subscribe to the channel, follow me on Twitch, follow me on Twitter. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Stay cool, stay righteous, stay safe.
Family, 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 family.